In this video, you'll learn how to set up and run optimization experiments using Google Optimize. You can use Google Optimize to run A/B tests, multivariate tests, and redirect tests on your website. This makes it the perfect tool for testing changes to improve conversions and engagement on your landing pages, funnels, and other content. Hey there, I'm Benjamin from Loves Data. I'm going to walk you through the steps to set up your Google Optimize account, including how to link Google Optimize to Google Analytics. And I'll also show you how to create and launch the different types of optimization tests you can run on your website. Let's get started. The first thing we need to do is create our Google Optimize account. To do this, we need to head to optimize.google.com. I've also included a link in the description below this video. We need to log in using our Google account, and then we click Get Started. If you've already created an account, then when you log in, you'll see the account you've already created. Since I'm creating a new account, I need to select my email preferences and then click Next. Now we need to decide if we want to share the data from our Google Optimize account with Google. Select our location, and agree to the terms. Now we click Done. We can see our Google Optimize account has been created. Before we create our first experiment in Google Optimize, I recommend linking Google Analytics and Google Optimize. This lets you access additional metrics and dimensions in your Google Analytics reports. To link our accounts, let's select Settings on the top right corner. Now let's click Link to Analytics. Using the drop-down, we can select our Google Analytics property. Since Universal Analytics will stop collecting data in mid-2023, I recommend linking Google Optimize to your GA4 Google Analytics 4 property. All of the GA4 properties you have access to will be labeled. So let's select our property, and then our data stream. When you're happy, click Link. The next step is to install Google Optimize on our website. There are a few different ways you can install Google Optimize, but Google's recommendation is to use the dedicated Optimize snippet. So let's copy the Optimize code. Now we need to add this to all of the pages on our website. It should be the first thing in our head tags. Let's take a look at how we can do this on my demo Squarespace site. Let's head to Squarespace. Let's select Settings, then Advanced, and Code Injection. Now we need to paste the snippet into the header section and save our changes. We've now added the Google Optimize code to our website. If you're not using Squarespace, then you can also add Google Optimize to all of your pages by adding the code to your template file. You can also add the code using Google Tag Manager, but Google doesn't recommend using this option. And if you're using WordPress, you can use Google's Sitekit plugin. Let's take a look at how to do this. We need to install our Google Optimize container ID. Let's copy this. Now let's head to WordPress. I've already logged into my demo WordPress site and I've installed Google's Sitekit plugin, so let's select this. And let's select Connect More Services and click Set Up Optimize. Now we need to paste the container ID we copied from Google Optimize and click Configure Optimize. That's it. We can see Google Optimize has now been added to our WordPress site. Now let's head back to Google Optimize. The final thing we need to do before we create our first experiment is to install the Google Optimize extension for Chrome. This extension is needed to use the visual editor and make changes to our website. So let's click Install Extension. And let's add the extension to Chrome. Okay, now we can create our first experiment. It's time to click Let's Go. We can create an A/B test, multivariate test, redirect test, personalize the content on our website, and add a notification banner to the top of our website. Today I'm going to show you how to create an A/B test, a multivariate test, and a redirect test. Let's start by creating an A/B test. A/B tests are perfect when you're getting started. They work on websites and pages that receive lots of traffic and websites that only receive a small amount of traffic. They're great for testing very different ideas and even work if you have a lower conversion rate. So I'm going to name my experience Main Menu. And I'm going to enter the page that I want to improve. And I'm going to click Create. Now we need to click Add Variant. This will be the new version of the page that we test against the original version. I'm going to name the variant Join the Free Course. And now let's click Done. We can see that there are no changes to our new variant yet, so let's click Edit. Our page now loads along with the visual editor. For this experiment, I'm going to test the way my free course is included in my main menu, so I'm going to select the element I want to change. Now I need to highlight that Google Optimize will use the elements class and ID to select the elements you are modifying with your experiment. You can see this by clicking the Select Element icon on the left. Because I'm using Squarespace for my website, I've found that some elements have IDs that are dynamic and change, and elements can also share the same class. So to be safe, I'm going to deselect the options for Element ID and Element Class. If you're not using Squarespace, you might not need to do this, but it's worth testing your changes on different devices and browsers to make sure everything appears correctly and works. This is especially important to do before launching your first experiment. Okay, now I'm going to close this, and let's click Edit Element, and select Edit Text. Now I'm going to change the text so that it says Join the Free Course instead of Free Analytics Course. Now I'm going to click Done. And I'm going to click Save. And just to highlight, you can change more than one element on your page. You can change the headings, text, images, and other content too. But for this experiment, I'm going to keep things simple. Again, I recommend taking the time to test and preview your changes. You can do this using the device options at the top of the editor. Let's select the interactive mode icon and select the menu. We can see it still says Free Analytics Course, so the menu on mobile devices must be different, so we need to apply the change again. To do this, let's click Exit. Select the element. Adjust the Select Elements option again, and make the change to the element. Then we click Done at the bottom. We click Save. And when we're happy that we've applied all the changes we want to test, we can click Done. To test your variants on different browsers, you can click the preview icon, and then click Share Preview. This lets you copy a link that you can then use to preview the variant on other devices. Okay, now that I've made the change I want to test to my website, it's time to check the other configuration options in Google Optimize. Since I want to test my new menu text across my whole website, I'm going to adjust the page targeting. If I don't, then the change we made would only be shown to people on the individual page we entered when we created the experiment. So I'm going to click the Edit icon under Page Targeting for the URL. And I'm going to change Matches to Contains. This means the experiment will run across all the pages of my website. If you're only testing a change on an individual page, for example, if you're testing a new headline on a page, then don't change the targeting for your experiment. Now I'm going to click Save. Now let's scroll down and select the objectives for our experiment. This is where we select the metrics we want to improve. So let's select Add Experiment Objective. We can then select Choose from List, which will include any e-commerce purchases, any conversions we have configured, and page views. And there's also the option to create a custom objective. Today I'm going to select Choose from List, and I'm going to select the metrics I'm hoping to improve. There are some other options you can configure, but I'm happy with my experiment, so I'm going to scroll back to the top, and I'm going to click Start to launch my experiment. That's it. Now I just need to wait until enough people participate in my experiment, and then I can check back to see the results in Google Optimize. Let's close our experience. And let's select Create Experience again. Apart from A/B tests, you can also create multivariate tests in Google Optimize. Multivariate tests are ideal for pages that receive lots of traffic, if you want to test multiple elements in a page, and for refining your ideas. For example, after running a successful A/B test, then you might want to consider running a multivariate test to make smaller tweaks and refinements to your page. Okay, let's create another experiment. Let's name the experiment GA4 Complete Course. I'm going to enter the URL of my GA4 Complete course. Let's select Multivariant, and let's click Create. Multivariant tests take longer to complete because each change you make creates a new variant. For example, if you tested 2 new variants of a button and 3 variants for some content, that would mean we have a total of 9 variations that will be tested. We can see there are 2 sections created for us by default. These are Section A and Section B. Sections are used for each element you want to test. I'm going to test a change to a button and to a heading, so let's rename Section A and call it Button. And click Done. And let's rename Section B and call it Heading. And click Done. Now we need to add the variants for each section. I'm going to test 1 new button and 1 new heading, so let's click Add Variant under Button. Let's name this variant Red Button. And click Done. Now let's click Add Variant under Heading, and let's name it Long Heading. Let's edit the button first. I've already created some CSS to change the style of the button, so let's click the Add Code icon on the top right. And let's select CSS. Now it's time to make the changes we want to test to the other element. For my experiment, this is the heading, so let's select the 3 vertical dots for the variant. And let's select Edit. Now I'm going to select the heading. Choose the Select Elements icon. Deselect Use Element ID and Class, again because I'm using Squarespace. And then let's select Edit Element. And let's choose Edit Text. Now we can change the heading. Once we're ready, we can click Done. And then Save. And Done. We've now created an alternate heading and an alternate button for the page we are testing. Selecting the Combinations tab lets us view all of the combinations. Since we're testing one new heading and one new button, this means we have a total of 4 combinations. And we can preview each of these combinations and see the variants that are used for each combination. Now we can scroll down and select the primary and secondary objectives for the experiment. When you're ready, you can click Start to launch your test. Okay, now that we've created an A/B test and a multivariate test, it's time to cover redirect tests. This lets you test 2 existing pages on your website. They're the perfect type of test if you're testing lots of changes on a landing page or if you want to test different funnel pages on your website. Let's take a look. Let's create one more experience. I'm going to create an experiment that tests my existing About Us page against a new version. So I'm going to name the experience About Us page. And I'm going to enter the URL of the original page. Now let's choose Redirect Test and click Create. Now let's click Add Variant. I'm going to name my variant New About Us page. We can then choose to redirect a single page or the advanced redirect option. I'm going to redirect a single page, but you can use the advanced option if you want to modify URLs and match multiple pages. For example, if you created a new series of checkout pages for your online store, then you could use this option to test a series of pages. For my test, I'm going to ensure redirect to a single page is selected. And I'm going to enter the URL of the alternate About Us page I want to test. At the bottom, we can now see our original page and the page we're testing. Now let's click Done. You can add additional pages to test by adding more variants, but the more you add, the longer the test will take. So I'm going to leave this and I'm going to scroll down and set the primary and secondary objectives for the experiment. When you're happy, you can click Start to launch the experiment. That's it. We've now launched 3 experiments in Google Optimize. I recommend running each experiment for at least 3 weeks. You can select an experiment in Google Optimize to see if you've improved your conversions, transactions, or other objectives. And when you open an experiment, it will tell you if you need to continue running your experiment, if a winner has been found, or if there's no measurable difference. What type of experiment are you going to run in Google Optimize? I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel for all of my latest tutorials. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.